To suppose that the eye could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest possible degree. I am turned into a sort of machine for observing facts and grinding out conclusions. Everything in nature is the result of fixed laws. The normal food of man is vegetable. The school as a means of education to me was simply a blank. Nothing exists for itself alone, but only in relation to other forms of life. Multiply, vary, let the strongest live and the weakest die. If the misery of the poor be caused not by the laws of nature, but by our institutions, great is our sin. Much love, much trial, but what an utter desert is life without love. Nature will tell you a direct lie if she can. I always make special notes about evidence that contradicts me. Supportive evidence I can remember without trying. At no time am I a quick thinker or writer. Whatever I have done in science has solely been by long pondering, patience, and industry. Blushing is the most peculiar and most human of all expressions. The willing horse is always overworked. A mathematician is a blind man in a dark room, looking for a black cat, which isn't there. There is no fundamental difference between man and animals in their ability to feel pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. Endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved. Man in his arrogance thinks himself a great work, worthy the interposition of a great deity. More humble and I believe true to consider him created from animals. Intelligence is based on how efficient a species became at doing the things they need to survive. The most powerful natural species are those that adapt to environmental change without losing their fundamental identity, which gives them their competitive advantage. If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. I'm not apt to follow blindly the lead of other men. Even people who aren't geniuses can outthink the rest of mankind if they develop certain thinking habits. In the struggle for survival, the fittest win out at the expense of their rivals because they succeed in adapting themselves best to their environment. The world will not be inherited by the strongest. It will be inherited by those most able to change. Some call it evolution, and others call it God. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives. But the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. We are not here concerned with hopes or fears, only with truth as far as our reason permits us to discover it. The very essence of instinct is that it's followed independently of reason. Worms have played a more important part in the history of the world than humans would at first suppose. Every new body of discovery is mathematical in form, because there is no other guidance we can have. I have called this principle, by which each slight variation, if useful, is preserved, by the term of natural selection. I have been speculating last night what makes a man a discoverer of undiscovered things. As far as I can conjecture, the art consists in habitually searching for the causes and meaning of everything which occurs. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds, which follows from the advance of science. If I had life to live over again, I would give my life to poetry, to music, to literature, and to art to make life richer and happier. In my youth, I steeled myself against them and thought them so much waste. Building a better mousetrap merely results in smarter mice. Music was known and understood before words were spoken. There is a grandeur in this view of life. From so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful, are being evolved. Great is the power of steady misrepresentation, but the history of science shows that fortunately this power does not long endure. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength, but adaptability. It's not the strongest, but the most adaptable that survive. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change, that lives within the means available and works cooperatively against common threats. Only the fittest will survive. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. It is not the strongest or the most intelligent who will survive, but those who can best manage change. It is easy to specify the individual objects of admiration in these grand scenes, but it is not possible to give an adequate idea of the higher feelings of wonder, astonishment, and devotion which fill and elevate the mind. We behold the face of nature bright with gladness. I'm dying by inches from not having anybody to talk to about insects. If I had not been so great an invalid, I should not have done so much as I have accomplished. Often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may have not devoted myself to a fantasy. I can remember the very spot in the road, whilst in my carriage, when to my joy the solution occurred to me. Life is nearly over with me. I have taken no pains about my style of writing. Daily it is forced home on the mind of the biologist that nothing, not even the wind that blows, is so unstable as the level of the crust of this earth. As the sense of smell is so intimately connected with that of taste, it is not surprising that an excessively bad odor should excite wrenching or omitting in some persons. Nothing is easier than to admit in words the truth of the universal struggle for life, or more difficult, at least I have found it so, than constantly to bear this conclusion in mind. Man selects only for his own good, nature only for that of the being which she tends. Attention, if sudden and close, graduates into surprise, and this into astonishment, and this into stupefied amazement. The survival or preservation of certain favored words in the struggle for existence is natural selection. It is impossible to conceive of this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance or necessity. Even when we are quite alone, how often do we think with pleasure or pain of what others think of us? Of their imagined approbation or disapprobation? Our faculties are more fitted to recognize the wonderful structure of a beetle than a universe. To kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. A scientific man ought to have no wishes, no affections, a mere heart of stone. I'm not the least afraid to die. Free will is to mind what chance is to matter. All that at present can be said with certainty is that, as with the individual, so with the species, the hour of life has run its course. Answer is spent. Till facts be grouped and called, there can be no prediction. The only advantage of discovering laws is to foretell what will happen and to see the bearing of scattered facts. It may be conceit, but I believe the subject will interest the public, and I am sure that the views are original. As for a future life, every man must judge for himself between conflicting vague probabilities. Man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. Nothing can be more improving to a young naturalist than a journey in a distant country. We thus learn that man is descended from a hairy quadruped, furnished with a tail and pointed ears, probably arboreal in its habits, and an inhabitant of the Old World. False facts are highly injurious to the progress of science, for they often endure long, but false views, if supported by some evidence, do little harm, for everyone takes a salutary pleasure in proving their falseness. It is no valid objection that science as yet throws no light on the far higher problem of the essence or origin of life. Who can explain gravity? No one now objects to following out the results consequent on this unknown element of attraction. Physiological experiment on animals is justifiable for real investigation, but not for mere damnable and detestable curiosity. Traveling ought also to teach him distrust, but at the same time he will discover how many truly good-natured people there are. Natural selection has been the main but not exclusive means of modification.